avoid this?
Well, I'm going to talk to you about ormus, which is a mysterious and mythical white powder which holds many and various life-giving and confounding properties. You might have heard of or seen or even taken some of these new age supplements sold under the name of ormus or Monatomic Gold, but the reported effects of the real thing include advanced powers of perception, spiritual awakening, DNA repair, and miraculous healing. It has its roots right back at the dawn of human civilization and weaves a fascinating but obscure path through human civilization to the present day. In short, it's purported to be a quasi-religious sacrament sought throughout history by elite or knowledge-keeping groups and bloodlines, which heightens powers of perception, intuition, and promotes physical longevity and qualities of leadership in those that consume it. Furthermore, the substance transmits powers of levitation, transmutation, teleportation, produces bright light or deadly rays, and it's a superconductor. Alrighty. So it also transmits powers of levitation, transmutation, and teleportation, produces brilliant light or deadly rays, can be described as a superconductor, which exists partially in another dimension. Gold as we normally know it is a yellow metal, but when properly separated atom from atom, it yields a pure white powder-like substance with differing chemical properties. So what is this powder which doesn't appear on the periodic table? Is this the mythical Holy Grail or the Philosopher's Stone? The manufacture of the substance has been a heavily guarded secret throughout history, with different cultures employing different methods for extraction, manufacture, and distillation. So I'm going to look at the names it's been called throughout history, scientific explanations of what we're dealing with here, the use of ormus throughout ancient and religious history, and its relationship to alchemy, modern science, and what its current incarnation looks like, and also how it relates to the current changes and the awakening of humanity that we're currently going into. So the name ormus, O-R-M-U-S, covers several related strands within a wider phenomenon. Most simply, we're referring to monatomic gold, but almost covers the monatomic state versions of any or all of the platinum group of metals, which is ruthenium, rhodium, palladium, osmium, iridium, and platinum. It's been referred to by many ancient cultures as the powder of projection. In ancient Mesopotamia, it was known as Shemana, which means highwood fire stone. From Shemana, we derive manna from Jewish culture, which was the food of the gods, which directly translates as the question, what is it? And it's related to Jewish showbread. The ancient Egyptians called it mufkuts, which incidentally also translates literally as what is it, while the hieroglyphic graphic representation is made up of the symbols for spirit, fire, and stone. It was pictured in carved reliefs on many temple walls and stela in the shape of tall triangular bread cakes. And you can pass those around. The Egyptians were the only culture that depicted it pictorially, and it's those sort of triangular cakes offered to the gods, or possibly from the gods. Other poetic names attributed to ormus by the ancient Egyptians include the golden tear from the eye of Horus, that which issues from the mouth of the Creator, and the semen of the Father in heaven. The word ormus first appeared in Zoroastrian thought and in Gnostic texts, where it's synonymous with the principle of light. The name Ormes, O-R-M-E-S, is ancient Hebrew for the golden tree of life. And by alleged coincidence, it's the more recent acronym given to the phenomenon by modern day science, which is ORME, O-R-M-E. which stands for orbitally rearranged monatomic elements.
Wow, orbitally.
Orbitally. Other modern names for the substance stem from the attempt to define what we're dealing with here by quantum science, molecular theory, and superconductivity. The term M-state seems to be the current name tag for the phenomenon. So let's take a brief look at how modern science defines and explains this. So M-state materials are asymmetrically formed high-spin state, where the nucleus of the atom expands its sphere of influence over the outermost electrons, affecting the way in which the electrons spin around the nucleus. The Institute for Advanced Studies in Austin, Texas, describes such phenomena as exotic matter, which is a vague definition for matter that has no gravitational attraction. Transition group elements can, in a monatomic, super-deformed high-spin and low-energy state, lose their chemical reactivity and metallic nature, thereby resulting in a state of superconductivity, a resonant condition whereby the correlation of the forward spin and reverse spin electrons cause individual atoms to turn to pure white light, making them impossible to link with other atoms. These precious metals have the unique ability to remain stable in the monatomic form, which can then lead to effects ranging from levitation to zero-point energy applications to fundamental biological and/or human physiological effects. So the main takeaway from all the science jargon is that a superconductor conveys energy through resonance and not physical contact. As such, Ormus is said to hold levitational properties. When transformed to the M state, gold loses 4/9, which is 44% of its gravitational weight. The material is a resonance-connected quantum oscillator, and it resonates in 2 dimensions, which happens to be another definition of a superconductor from a different angle. In layman's terms, part of the mass exists in another dimension. So, especially with the advance of quantum computing now, where information is offloaded technically to another dimension, this is similar science where we're having to accept that these things exist. When we look into the history of substances described as white gold in ancient religious and historical texts, we start to see a pattern of an ingested transformative sacrament passed down through the ages and civilizations. The story of Ormus begins in what is considered the earliest civilization of ancient Sumer, which was located where we find modern-day Iraq, between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers. The concept is best understood if we accept Zechariah Sitchin's translation and interpretation of the ancient Sumerian tablets. This mythology, found written in the cuneiform clay tablets in the region, is now considered by some to be the actual genesis of the human race. Indeed, the biblical book of Genesis clearly derives from the earliest Sumerian texts, as there are many obvious parallels, including the flood myth and various characters and deities. A brief synopsis is that the Anunnaki, which means those who from heaven to earth came, arrived on Earth from the planet Nibiru to find gold, initially extracting it from seawater, especially the upper reaches of the Persian Gulf. Finding this too slow a method, eventually the Anunnaki genetically engineered the native primate species, probably Homo erectus, with their own DNA to create a slave species to work in mines. A chosen caste of this slave race acted as intermediaries between these long-lived ET gods and the human population at large, which then evolved into a civilization which worshipped their masters. The origins of an ingested sacrament lie in the original concept of the starfire ritual, whereby the chosen bloodline kings were fed with the hormone-rich lunar essence, i.e. menstrual blood, of the Anunnaki goddess. Direct interaction with the Anunnaki god beings diminished over time and the majority of the ET beings eventually left Sumer, but the elites continued the mining operation and were nourished with Shemana, the highwood fire stone, given to the Sumerian peoples by the Anunnaki in place of the menstrual blood ritual. This was also called the milk of Ishtar and the Afinda stone, and it's described in depictions as a triangular stone, much like the ones found in those Egyptian reliefs. So the esoteric and possibly symbolic donation of blood from the gods to the elite was finally replaced by a manufactured substance, a stone or a milk. In ancient Egypt, Ormus is referred to as Mufkuts. Inscriptions at Karnak Temple in Luxor from the reign of Pharaoh Tutmosis III depict cone-shaped offerings described in hieroglyphs as both a metal gold and white bread. Relief carvings referred to as the measure relief, which is a kind of royal inventory, show the same triangular depictions. Another relief portrays the treasurer Sobek Hotep presenting a conical loaf to Pharaoh Amenhotep III. In this respect, however, Sobek Hotep is described as he who brought the noble and precious stone to his majesty, and he is called the Great One of the Secrets of the House of Gold. The House of Gold is thought to be a synonym for the secret society of the Great White Brotherhood, the name referring to the white powder in question. Furthermore, the depictions in the pyramid texts carvings, which are inside the Unas pyramid at Saqqara, show that its use as a sacrament gives access to the field of Mufkuts, also called the realm of the blessed. And it was Lawrence Gardner that suggested that the once sealed king's chamber in the Great Pyramid of Giza was in fact contrived as a superconductor itself, capable of transporting the pharaoh into another dimension of space-time through the Meissner field, which is the body's magnetic aura, basically. According to the Egyptian Book of the Dead and the Papyrus of Ani, the Egyptian rite of passage consisted of a 40-day fast to totally cleanse the digestive system, and then the ingestion of mufkuts for the next 30 days. The 40-day fast has biblical parallels as well, obviously. And we will refer to this fasting process again later on in the modern day. Another ancient Egyptian connection could well be the unexplained building of the pyramids, although that's a bit of a far-out theory, maybe utilising Ormus's anti-gravity effects to levitate the millions of huge multi-ton blocks. Past life regression accounts, like the ones that Dolores Cannon undertook, there's quite a few where people have asked to be transported back to the time of the building of the pyramids to try and see what was going on, and levitation seems to be the sort of most common reported method of building. So the end of the Old Kingdom period in ancient Egypt is seemingly when the knowledge is lost in Egypt and starts the migration round to the New World at the hands of Moses during his biblical exodus. Historians and Egyptologists have varying theories of who Moses actually might have been in terms of the Egyptian hierarchy. The three main contenders are Akhenaten, who you will have seen statues of, the rather weird alien-looking pharaoh. He was an enigmatic character who introduced monotheism to Egypt, but was effectively banished from Egypt after it didn't really take hold. Another contender for Moses is Senenmet, who we mentioned earlier, who is the vizier, advisor, and architect of Queen Hatshepsut. Or other contenders are any of the Tutmosis pharaohs, 1, 2, 3, or 4, who obviously have Moses at the end of their names, and they match best in terms of timeline comparisons. Interestingly enough, both Senenmet and Tutmosis III are depicted in Karnak in the temples alongside those conical white bread cakes that are on those pictures. So whoever Moses was in relation to Egyptian royal descent, we know that the Exodus saw him lead the Israelite slaves out of Egypt to Mount Horeb on the Sinai Peninsula, where he received the tablets of the Ten Commandments from God. You recall the biblical story whereby, whilst Moses was away from the encampment, talking to God and collecting the Ten Commandments, the Israelites made a golden idol of a calf. Moses comes back furious at this reversion to paganism and commands Bezaleel, the goldsmith that's part of their touring party, to burn the statue, from which he makes a white powder, manna. He mixed the white powder with water and feeds it to the Israelites. That's all in the Bible. In 1911, at Serabit al-Qadim, which is thought to be the biblical Mount Horeb, British archaeologist Flinders Petrie found the remains of a temple bearing inscriptions relating to mufkuts and a depiction of the conical bread cakes. These inscriptions reference pharaohs from the 4th through to the 19th dynasties, including a representation of Tutmosis IV in the presence of the goddess Hathor. Before him were 2 offering stands topped with lotus flowers, and behind him a man bearing a conical object described as white bread. But most interestingly of all, he found what is now described in mainstream archaeology as a mining camp. But according to Petrie himself, he said it appeared to be more of a smelting operation. And the whole area, when he found it, was covered in a thick layer of white powder that they just cleared away, thinking it was dust or didn't know what it was, so they got rid of it. So because it was running from the 4th through to the 19th dynasty, this seemed to have been an out-of-empire operation to create this stuff for the pharaohs. Hathor, who is depicted in these reliefs, is a major deity in the Egyptian pantheon, often depicted as a cow goddess. So this connects nicely with the idol of the golden calf, which Moses found his followers worshipping after he was waylaid collecting the Ten Commandments. The milk of Hathor was another name for mufkuts and was said to heighten the pharaoh's powers of perception and divinity. So was this the story of Moses taking the Ormus method out of Egypt and swapping over to monotheism, which suggests that it might have been Akhenaten? Also found at Mount Horeb were inscriptions in a script which connect late Egyptian hieratic script to early forms of Hebrew and Phoenician. So this connects us through biblical history into Jewish history. So there's an emerging migration detectable of this knowledge or lineage from the Karnak priests through to the Essenes of Qumran, which is in Judea near Galilee. The Essenes, as you might know, were a mystical Jewish sect that Jesus is said to have belonged to in certain schools of thought. And they seem to take their lineage from, or have a parallel lineage to, the priests of Melchizedek. So the original figure of Melchizedek is one of those early biblical characters that have been obscured by modern Christian traditions. He was a priest king of Salem who ordained Solomon. But many people have never heard of him. He's described as having no mother or father. He's mentioned in ancient Jewish texts as well as the Old Testament. Among the Dead Sea Scrolls found at Qumran, he is referred to as a divine being and is referred to as El or Elohim. Those terms have ties back to the Sumerian origins of Genesis. And these titles are usually reserved for God, meaning God or gods. The Qumran scrolls also indicate that Melchizedek was used as a name for the archangel Michael. Among Gnostics, Melchizedek is a messianic figure known as the teacher of righteousness, which happens to be another name given for Ormus. In the Moses story, it was the priests of Melchizedek, of the lineage from his original appearance, who were permitted beyond the veil of the Holy of Holies, where they partook of the bread in the presence of God. When they ate this bread, they reportedly could interact with the Ark of the Covenant, which is the magical gold-plated box concealing the tablets of the Ten Commandments but also the remnants of the manna described earlier that Moses had made from the calf, the golden calf. The ark has been theorized as having been a superconducting capacitor with radioactive properties used as a weapon against enemies, and which was said to bear its own weight and that of those that carried it. So again, the anti-gravitational properties. The sacrament of bread and wine was not a new concept created by Jesus at the Last Supper, but comes from the lineage of the Melchizedek priests. It's referred to in Genesis as having been performed for Abraham by the high priest of Melchizedek. Indeed, holy bread, as distinct from common bread, is referenced in the Old Testament as a holy sacrament in relation to both David and Solomon. The holy bread is specifically identified as showbread or shewbread, which leads us to deduce that the same sacrament followed the Exodus in the Jewish and then Christian faiths, synonymous with manna. So the Christian Eucharistic wafer nowadays is therefore an inert symbolic derivation of this tradition that's passed down and was probably Ormus. So the order of Melchizedek seems to have been the priestly keepers of this line. So that's what I really think the secret societies going through time is, this order of Melchizedek, but renamed different things as we go on. In this tradition, Christos was an appellation given to initiates. Thus, in this line of thinking, Jesus himself was an adept of this same lineage rather than the messianic figure that the Bible makes out of modern Christianity. He was an exemplar of one who has prepared and undertaken the sacrament and achieved gnosis and ascension. And the Last Supper was him passing on the sacrament to his disciples and this knowledge before he ascended, if indeed he ascended. In Jewish law, the texts of the Kabbalah refer multiple times to the occult gold, texts which would subsequently be taken by the Templars back to Europe and would play an essential part in steering the esoteric thinking of subsequent alchemists and secret societies. So after the establishment of early Christianity, the occult knowledge kept in Gnostic Christian sects moved out of the Levant, and this migration follows the Gnostic journey of Mary Magdalene into France in 44 AD. Joseph, the father of Jesus, was said to be a carpenter or tradesman. However, this is now accepted to have been a mistranslation in the King James Version of the Bible, and is now more likely to have meant master craftsman. Lawrence Gardner believes that he was probably one of the gold processors of Egypt and then Judea, as the family moved back between the two places in the Bible frequently. He was continuing the family trade of the Davidic bloodline lineage, of which he was proven to be a part, which, if the Magdalene and Grail legends are followed, leads to France, and particularly Bézieux in the Languedoc, where the Cathars set up their alchemical factories by the river. There's been found to be a lot of alluvial gold coming off the Pyrenees there, and they were thought to be extracting gold and creating Ormus there. The Bogomils were the Gnostic forebears of the Cathars who migrated into Eastern and then Western Europe around the 10th century. The Templars, on returning from the Crusades in the Middle East, were sympathetic to the philosophies and practices of the Cathars and took on the knowledge of Ormus production. They also brought back a lot of Kabbalistic texts from the Middle East as well, which will have taught them the same methods. Quintessential gold is the name that the Templars, medieval Templars, used, and it was used in the production of stained glass in all of the Gothic cathedrals they built throughout France. The Templars are also mentioned in the Grail story of Parzival by Wolfram von Eschenbach, who says, "The Templars live from a stone whose essence is most pure. It is called lapsit exilis. By virtue of this stone, the phoenix is burnt to ashes, in which he is reborn. Such powers does the does the stone confer on mortal men, that their flesh and bones are made young again. The stone is also called the Grail. So books that have been popularised about this subject, such as Henry Lincoln's famous The Holy Blood and the Holy Grail, and then the sort of pop culture version, fiction version, which was Dan Brown's Da Vinci Code, don't really get into the subject of Ormus. It's the one aspect of this whole mystery that they leave out, which is quite interesting, especially because Henry Lincoln claims that the name Ormus was actually an alternate title for the Priory of Sion, which itself is a much debated religious sect which features in these mysteries. Maybe this is to mislead the reader. He's been criticised a great deal for having been some sort of secret society dupe. There's been a lot of doubt thrown towards the Holy Blood and the Holy Grail book and the subsequent TV interviews that he had in the early 90s with the alleged Grand Master of the Priory of Sion. So people think that this might all just be a great red herring to distract from the Ormus subject. Rather than the exoteric reading of alchemy as the transformation of base metals into gold, an esoteric understanding of that is the refinement of gold itself. Old alchemical texts refer to the white powder of gold, the food of the gods, suggesting that the much sought after philosopher's stone might well have been Ormus. This is most clearly stated in by Philalethes in his 1667 treatise Secrets Revealed. So he says, and I quote, "Gold digested to the highest degree of purity and subtle fixation. It is called a stone by virtue of its fixed nature, and it resists the action of fire as successfully as any stone. But its appearance is that of a very fine powder. The stone does not exist in nature, but has to be prepared by art in obedience to nature's laws. Thus you see our stone is made of gold alone, yet it is not common gold." So that's very suggestive that they're talking about Ormus there. A lasting alchemical mantra is divide, 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 akin to the process of dilute, dilute, dilute behind homeopathy. And it suggests that only by freeing atoms of an element from the confines of its crystalline-like structure can one hope to achieve the alchemist's goal. It was the French chemist Nicolas Flamel, also an alchemist. He was one of the originators of modern chemistry, and he's said to have learned the secrets of alchemy from a Jewish converso on his Santiago de Compostela pilgrimage in Spain. He wrote, "When the noble metal was perfectly dried and digested, it made a fine powder of gold, which is the philosopher's stone." Again, another alchemist strongly suggesting that Ormus is the point of alchemy. The great work of alchemy has an allegorical side to it as well. So it's both physical and spiritual. And the true philosopher's stone may be where these two paths meet. So it's a concept which quantum science is now reinforcing. Both historical alchemists and modern Ormus advocates alike contend that the great work must be approached in the right mind or with a true heart, a trope used in pop culture in films like Indiana Jones when he's taking the Holy Grail or wielding the Ark of the Covenant, so you must have a pure heart. As all reported processes for developing both the Philosopher's Stone and Ormus are elaborate, repetitious and laborious in their method, this brings to mind the modern experiments of Professor Masaru Emoto, who proved that the molecular structure of a substance can be affected by the emotions and intent of its handler. So the attitude in which the work is approached might also explain the reluctance of alchemists to publish or profit from their findings. And as such, the commonly disseminated myth about alchemy being the turning of base metals into gold might well have been a ruse to mislead those unworthy ambition. So from the ancient cultures we've mentioned of the Middle East and the Near East, we can trace the secret knowledge being passed through the Middle Ages by the Templars, Cathars, Albigensians, and alchemists, and these hidden currents are today continued in secret societies. The lineage is very hazy and disputed, but these societies could well be the modern continuation of the Melchizedek priesthood, which I mentioned. As referred to earlier, the Great White Brotherhood, with its roots in ancient Egypt, is said to be named after the white powder gold. And that's a secret society which still exists, and its mission might well have been the passing down of this knowledge. According to Masonic teachings, Ormus was also the name of an Egyptian sage and mystic, a Gnostic adept of Alexandria. He lived supposedly during the early years of the Christian epoch. In AD 46, he and 6 of his followers were supposedly converted to a form of Christianity by one of Jesus' disciples, St. Mark in most accounts, conferring on his new constituted order of initiates a specific identifying symbol, a red cross or a rose cross. The original Rosicrucius symbol, a red cross in a circle, derived from that of Bharat Anna, or Diana, of the 9 fires, the goddess of light and fire. Many of the mystery schools follow paths which work on developing the light body of the initiate, called in Tibetan philosophy the rainbow body. Ormus in these traditions is seen as a physical aid to help develop this, so it's food for the light body. The later formal creation and continuation of the Rosicrucian lineages might well have been for the purpose of covering up this occult knowledge through the umbrella of invisible colleges that have sprung up since. In the 1500s, Nostradamus prophesied that, and I quote, "By 1999, the occult gold will be known to science." We've seen the connection to Ormus of the Kabbalistic tree of life. In the book of Isaiah, it says, "A latter-day David, a descendant of the Davidic bloodline, is the one who will plant the golden tree of life." Well, indeed it was a David Hudson, a farmer and businessman from Phoenix, Arizona, who inadvertently brought the Ormus phenomenon back into the light in 1995, so just 4 years off Nostradamus' prediction. So, following attempts to leach salt and precious metals from his soil, David Hudson found a layer of strange white powder strewn across his farmland. This white powder would burst into flames when exposed to direct sunlight and disappear without a trace. Intrigued, Hudson, an amateur scientist himself, strove to find out what he was dealing with and eventually sent off samples for emission spectroscopy analysis. Unhappy with the inconclusive results, Hudson finally involved some Russian molecular analysts who raised concern about the substance when they attempted the analytical assay. Strange properties of weightlessness and even negative weight were reported, and the analysts suggested that he patented it as soon as possible before the US government got involved. But Hudson was unable to patent the material itself, as by patent law the substance needs to be measured accurately, and the Ormus defied measurement on several occasions. Nonetheless, Hudson was able to patent some of his methods used to refine it, and became the go-to guy for modern-day Ormus. He coined the term Ormus, and he started drawing many of the historical and biblical parallels that we've been looking into. He tells of a story whereby, in the method of looking into what he was dealing with, and his religious research, especially into the manner and showbread of Jewish history, and he went to find a Rabbi Plotkin, at the temple Beth Israel in Phoenix. So he asked him, "Rabbi, have you ever heard of the white powder of gold?" And he got the response, "Oh yes, Mr. Hudson, but to our knowledge no one's known how to make it since the destruction of the first temple." He said, "The white powder of gold is the magic. It can be used for white magic or black magic." Finally, Hal Puthoff, well known for working with the CIA on various esoteric projects for the US government, including various MKUltra, fringe activity, remote viewing, the UFO file. He made contact with Hudson and subsequently disappeared. Hudson subsequently disappeared from public life. There were only rumours about where he took his research. Before going underground, however, he did undertake a tour of the USA in the early 2000s, talking about his discoveries to an eager following comprising a new wave of American alchemists, the two most notable being Barry Carter and Don Nance. The Book of Aquarius is an anonymous author, by an anonymous author, is hailed as the modern-day alchemist's Bible by those who inhabit the online forums on the subject. Although, like most esoteric subjects on the internet, it's very hard to separate the wheat from the chaff and find any solid evidence of success. So what are these modern-day alchemists up to? They're notoriously cagey about disseminating information on the subject, but there seems to be both a wet method and a dry method, including which basically involve distillation of powdered gold, but seemingly no attempt to recreate the large-scale smelting and burning processes of the ancient Egyptians or biblical accounts that were presumably being employed at the metallurgic foundries found at the Ormus sites like Mount Horeb, where Moses was, and Qumran, where the Essenes were working. David Hudson maintained that the primary form in which gold occurs, in seawater, is in its monatomic state. So new methods of extracting Ormus from seawater have since been claimed, and modern supplements sold under the name of Ormus are usually derived from this. In the same vein, mineral-rich Dead Sea precipitate can contain relatively high levels of gold in M state. So various preparations of these salts, marketed as Ormus or Monotomic tinctures as well nowadays, but again, I've never heard of any lab tests or miraculous results. So we've seen that the ancients employed Ormus as a kind of spiritual supplement to promote advanced powers of perception, spiritual awakening, DNA repair, miraculous healing, physical longevity, and qualities of leadership in those that consume it. But what of modern reports of its medical effects? So, the Alpha Learning Institute in Switzerland ran clinical trials in 2002 and found that the positive effects of M-state materials derived from a balancing of the left and the right brain through the activating of the endocrine glands and the raising of melatonin produced in the pineal gland. They found out that by dry matter weight, over 5% of our brain tissue is composed of iridium and rhodium in the high spins M state. So this suggests that the M state trace elements are the component of our brain which either holds or conveys consciousness. It has now been suggested that if fast spin nuclei in these atoms is in proximity to a DNA molecule, the field surrounding the monoatoms will influence the DNA molecule to relax and repair itself. When telomerase, which in layman's term is a kind of limiting cap at the end of a DNA strand, and it results in the finite cell reproduction and therefore our lifespan, when this was replaced with a particle of M-state iridium at the end of the DNA strand, the strands were found to reorganize themselves and reform themselves. Less scientifically, the internet is full of reports of successful healing of AIDS, Lou Gehrig's disease, MS, arthritis, and many cancers with various concoctions of Ormus. But most intriguing of all to me is the report of David Hudson's test patient who undertook with him the Egyptian rite of passage fast that I mentioned earlier from the pyramid text. So this guy undertook the Egyptian rite of passage fast for 42 days, 9 of which were with nothing but water and then he started taking 500 milligrams of Ormus a day for 30 days. After 5 or 6 days of taking this material, he began to hear a very high frequency buzzing in his ears. Every day the sound got louder and louder until he described it as being like loudspeakers in his brain, literally roaring. When asked if it disturbed him, he replied that it was like nectar. He really enjoyed it, and it didn't come through the ears but was inside the brain, and it was a whoo sound. The Sufis, interestingly enough, use the whoo sound mantra in their practice. He only now sleeps 2 hours a night, and at the end of the 42-day fast, he went back to eating normally, predicting that the sound would die down, but it didn't. The sound kept growing louder. After 60 more days, he reported that dreams, revelations, and visions began. Light beings arrived to teach him, telepathically communicating with him. He finally reported a band of energy around his body, raising from the level of his pelvis up to his head, culminating in a column of energy flowing out the top of his head. So, what we can see described here is obviously what's now described as a Kundalini awakening, and the activation of the light body, or as the Egyptians called it, the Ka. With all of these supernatural properties being slowly scientifically verified, and steered towards modern technological applications, it's no wonder that this phenomenon was kept secret in elite groups over the ages. Ormus certainly fits the bill of a master key for physical, molecular, and spiritual panacea. In theory, anything faster than the speed of light is beyond our dimensional reality, and indeed exists in the next or fifth dimension. So by taking true Ormus regularly, one theoretically gradually replaces their fourth dimensional body with a fifth dimensional one, a body of superconducting light, which suggests 5D ascension. And so if our body becomes filled with light, and we literally eat this until our body exceeds our light body exceeds our physical body, then we're supposedly becoming light beings. The effect of Ormus has been described as resonating with human DNA to stimulate hormone production and enhance the immune system. The implications of a science to enliven human DNA has great implications in a world where we are being administered mRNA vaccines, which appear to be having an exact opposite effect that Ormus is reporting. So I'll just finish with a quote from Revelations 2:17. "Blessed be the man who will overcome, for he shall be given the hidden manna, the white stone of purest kind, upon which will be written a new name."
Wow.
I hope that was interesting.
I'm so glad that was recorded. Can I ask you something then? Because that's amazing.
Wonderful.
The cone triangle things,
Yeah.
aren't they in so many of the ancient illustrations from all around the world? And then I was thinking about in the Mayan stuff, and I was thinking Mayans, that whole, where did they go?
Yeah.
Kind of thing. So I was thinking about that, and then I was thinking of when you said it was called shamana. It's like
Yeah.
shaman, isn't it?
Yeah,
As well,
absolutely.
as well as mana.
I did look, because I kind of agreed with you, and I
Yeah.
thought I'd seen them depicted in other
And
ancient
Graham Hancock
things.
talks about that, doesn't he?
He does, yeah.
Yeah.
But I couldn't find any depictions or any sort of equivalent in South America, in fact.
Okay.
Although there's obviously a huge
Maybe in Turkey.
gold component there. Yeah, maybe in Turkey, yeah. But I
'Cause they
couldn't
were
find any of
massively into the gold thing, weren't they?
Yeah,
as
and
well,
also there's a
weren't
lot of hats
That's
in
And
Eastern
those-
Europe that
the
are conical.
basket things. They often have the cone
Oh yeah,
with the
yeah,
basket.
yeah.
And the handbag, yeah.
Well,
and
Dan Winter thinks that the pine cone thing isn't the pineal gland now. He thinks it's
it's the powder.
it's vortex mathematics, because he calls
Oh wow.
the creation of
Okay.
energy kissing pine cones that kind of vortex mathematics. So that's his, because in the Sumerian tablets they hold the pine cones towards
Like
each
that.
other like that,
Yeah.
and it's some sort of energy device, he reckons.
Okay.
But yeah, the handbags thing is a complete mystery. I don't know what that is.
Okay.
Yeah,
Maybe they're carrying the
maybe
powder.
they're carrying the gold.
So
I don't know.
otherwise it's just, the other thought I had was the guy in America that found it all.
Yeah, David Hudson.
Yeah. He. So do you think he sort of somehow, like, ingested it or breathed it in or something whilst he was when he just.
He doesn't report taking it himself at all.
But I
Whether
wondered the fact that he went off on this kind of mystical mission
yeah.
and talking to rabbis. Was it? He said?
Yeah, no, I mean, he just started doing research into the history of it and went
So
and
that's
found
what
this
I'm saying.
rabbi.
He might not have thought that he'd had any, but maybe he.
Oh, maybe. Yeah, I'm
Do you
not
see what
sure.
I mean? He
Well,
could
no one
breathe
knows
it
where
in.
he is now.
Well,
There's a good documentary which is more about the modern day alchemists. It's a bit like a Louis Theroux, look at all of these kooky weirdos type of
Yeah.
thing. I can't remember the name of the journalist, but the name of the documentary is All You Can Eat, or All the Gold You Can Eat, something like this. You have to pay a few quid online to watch it, but it's worth it. It's
Okay.
interesting, but it doesn't go much into history at all. And they try and find David Hudson at one of his last, one of the last talks he gives, and they're super cagey and they shut down his filming and everything like that. It's an English guy. He's
Right.
quite a likeable kind of
Okay.
Louis Theroux type character. Yeah.
Okay.
He's not dead then.
David Hudson?
Yeah.
No, apparently not. But no one knows where he is.
Yeah.
But the two other guys that I mentioned, who are Don Nance and Barry Carter, they're both in the film. And Don Nance talks a lot about the method, but you don't. There's always a level of caginess where
Yeah.
they've never really got any solid evidence of what they're doing or success or anything like that. So it's super underground. And as for David Hudson, they think he just got captured by the government, or
Yeah, that's why I
or
remember
his
happened to-
technology was taken
Yeah.
to use
Yeah,
for
that's what I understood.
for like
It's nice to
aerospace.
think that he's practicing somewhere under.
Well, yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So the Tibetans have the little cone shapes that they make.
Well, I don't know. Yeah.
They do.
Haven't
They-
looked
they
into
make
that.
Lots of those.
Well, they're certainly into the development of the rainbow or light body, aren't they? So
Yeah.
yeah,
Has anyone heard of Coral Castle?
yeah.
Well, it was cones that he was using.
That's very intriguing, isn't it? Yeah.
He sported
And
cones to
who was he called? Edward
Lincoln or something.
Lincoln or Scallon or something, isn't it?
Yes,
Yeah.
something
He-
like that, yeah.
He's claimed that he was using the technology that the Egyptians used to build the
Right,
pyramids.
yeah.
And is it Tellinger, Michael Tellinger, the
Yeah.
South African guy who was talking about gold in relation to some cones that he found.
That's right.
Mm.
And in fact,
somehow they were used.
I think
Bring
when
it
you
out
look
from
into
here.
the Anunnaki myths, they go to South Africa at some point when they run out of gold in Mesopotamia. He's really interesting. He's done a lot of
It is interesting, yeah.
Anunnaki stuff.
Yeah.
He keeps claiming to find these giant graves and
Yeah.
stuff like that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He's found hundreds of thousands of stone circles in South Africa.
Exactly.
He's documenting it at the moment, isn't he? Yeah, he said you can go on top of the hills and you can just see them everywhere. They're just everywhere.
Yeah.
And they're not quite sure what they are. But he did Adam's calendar as well, didn't he?
Yeah.
Which is like an ancient timepiece. He's very interesting.
Yeah, it is interesting.
Yeah. Yeah. He does the Ubuntu thing,
Yeah.
That's
That's
right.
right, yeah.
Yeah.
yeah, which a lot of people think that is the model that we're going to go back to in terms of how we live. He was poo-pooed by who's that guy? The kind of elder South African guy that David Icke went to see.
Freedom Motorway.
Yeah,
Mm.
he really poo-pooed Michael Tellinger. I think it's because he didn't like the fact that a white man came in and
Yeah.
was documenting everything. But yeah, he got quite upset about that.
Yeah.
Tellinger's work is really interesting. isn't
No,
it?
I think so as well. Yeah.
Yeah.
So in terms of the almost versus the Monotomic Gold, so like the Ethereum gold or things that we can buy. That's
Yeah, I got some of that.
yeah. I was looking for it. I was going to bring some actually. I couldn't find it. That's kind of taken from Mount Shasta somewhere. Is that like?
Well, I think it comes from all sorts, and a lot of it's Dead Sea salts, and a lot of it's probably just absolute rubbish.
It is quite gritty, isn't it? But but obviously you can make. Yeah, I think that's a different thing. That's the weightless bit.
Yeah, and in that book of Aquarius that I mentioned, that has the instructions
You tried it?
for both the wet and the dry. No, you need an awful lot of time. I think it's like 3 years to properly make some. Like, it's a really laborious alchemical process. More laborious than difficult, though, I'm led to believe. But there's no...
When you've made it.
So is that a thing now? Have they found that formula now? Because I remember when I did all my research all those years ago.
Yeah,
There was no
there's no
trace.
methods out there at all.
Now, so now has that changed?
Well, I think
in that book.
it's sort of creeping out, and I think the stuff in that book matches what Don Nance in that documentary I was talking about
Yeah.
kind of said, and there's almost the kind of philosophy between them that the time is now in terms of the 5D kind of thing.
Yeah.
We need to just disseminate it somehow and start making it. But again, it's very frustrating because you don't hear any reports of anyone having been successful, or certainly not publicising the fact.
Well, they wouldn't say, would they?
Well, I
mean,
guess
they're gonna
not.
Tell the world.
Well, I guess not. But if we want to awaken or help ourselves awaken, then
Yeah, but you've got to be discreet about who you tell.
well, yeah.
Well, no, I think
Or just put it in the water.
Especially if,
Yeah.
especially if it could be used either way.
Well, exactly like that rabbi said, it can be used for white or dark magic, like all of these esoteric tools.
It's going to come out of people like us, isn't it? It's not going to come out of the mainstream.
No.
They're not going to suddenly release this, so it'll be through us, won't it?
Yeah. When I was in Egypt and I hired this tour guide, Mohammed Ibrahim, that I've been following online, and after sort of the main tour that I did, and I talked to him about it, and he was quite amazed that I knew about mufkuts and stuff like that, and we just sat down and had a couple of hours conversation about it. And he said the last ceremony that they're done inside the Great Pyramid with a group, because you can just pay them off and do sort of all-night ceremonies in there if you get your baksheesh going.
Yeah.
Someone had some ormus, he called it ormus, and it was a brand name, and he had taken some
Right.
just out of interest. He's like, I hadn't really heard of it before, and now I'm really looking into it. So I said, did it work?
How was it?
Did you
Yeah.
go and meet Osiris or something?
Yeah.
And he said, I don't know if I took enough, but I had a kind of buzzing in my ears, but that was it really. He said he felt energized.
Well,
and
I
that's
suppose
that.
with one taking, and if you haven't fasted,
I think this is it.
You can't expect to
And this is probably the point that, I mean, that's a real undertaking to do a 40-day fast.
Yeah.
I mean, it says 9 days of that are water only, so presumably the rest of it is a vegan diet or a juice
Yeah.
type
Maybe
of thing.
just mornings or something.
Yeah. But maybe people just haven't.
It's also, it was interesting what you said about the intention.
Yeah.
In Masonic literature, with the Keys of Solomon, you actually see the shewbread on the altar, and obviously the altar is a symbol for the mind, so it is in there. It's absolutely there with the other symbols and with the pillars,
Yeah.
which are the temples.
Yeah.
That's what gives it away that it's your mind.
Yeah.
So, yeah, that's why these are called the temples. It definitely was used for something 100% along
Yeah.
those lines.
Well, then altar could be a derivation of the Ark of the Covenant itself, which had manna inside it.
Yeah. Well, also altar is alter state, isn't
Yeah.
it? So that's got that there.
Yeah. But you're right. If that is the focal point of a
It's right there.
worship
Just,
service,
Yeah.
then everyone's directing their positive energy towards it. Absolutely.
Would you think that it's a bit like doing ayahuasca or something which you have to do a very long ceremony
Yeah.
and do a lot
And a
of
preparation beforehand
like
and a diet.
years maybe
Yeah.
to actually get to that place where
Yeah.
you're
Well, if we look at, it's mainly it's a very elite pastime, to call it that, in Egypt, and it's the pharaohs being prepared for this journey, either in the pyramid or, if the pyramid was the vehicle to do that. So it wasn't an everyday thing, and if they were being prepared all their life for this journey, and that's what the Book of the Dead and everything is, it's basically a manual of how to navigate the duat, the afterlife. And if then they ingested after the fast, and then that was them disappearing. The other interesting thing is the Old Kingdom is where this seemed to be happening, and afterwards the knowledge kind of faded. The sort of esoteric magic of Egypt evaporated as that power went into the Jewish culture and stuff like that. And no bodies of any Old Kingdom pharaohs have ever been found, no mummies or anything.
Wow.
So there's theorising that they literally disappeared, like you hear about Tibetan lamas disappearing and just leaving behind. Yeah,
That's interesting.
yeah.
Yeah.
Some of Dolores Cannon's readings, people kind of just
That's
come,
it.
come and go, don't they?
Yeah, yeah.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
A good death, they call it. don't they?
That's it. How
Yeah.
to create a good death. How to have a good death.
Yeah.
What did the Tibetans leave behind? Sometimes they leave behind like a little
Just powder.
gemstone or powder
Yeah,
or something,
yeah,
isn't
yeah.
it? Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm.
I'm not sure what that is.
Can you tell us a bit about Nibiru, please?
Well, as much as I know, I'm no expert on that. But have you read Sitchin?
No.
I mean, I find that so Zachariah Sitchin was the guy that came out around the same time as Eric von Daniken
Yeah.
to sort of talk about the seeding of the theory that the human race was genetically engineered by ETs. I mean, it's pretty convincing, but Sitchin's specific translations have been kind of derived, knocked by mainstream historians now, or even people in
Yeah, he's not.
he's not really considered.
Yeah, it's a bit tricky with the thing about Zachariah Sitchin. I think he was a Russian Jew, but he could read the cuneiform texts on the Sumerian tablets, and there was, I think in the early 2000s there was about 13,000 of these tablets still there, and the Second Gulf War they destroyed them all because part of the war in Iraq was to destroy the antiquity. And in fact, Dan Cruikshank did a documentary in the late 80s talking about all the antiquity. And then he went back afterwards and he was like crying because the Americans, they used Ur, which was Abraham's town, as target practice.
That's right. There's an amazing picture online of all the
It makes me
GIs
feel sick about it now, but
up on the ziggurats.
that's right.
And you just think,
Yeah.
what are you doing?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Well, they were doing what they were told, weren't they?
Well,
yeah,
I
they were
guess
they were
so.
destroying it, and also ISIS was told to do it as well because
Yeah.
they're the same people.
Yeah.
But going back to Zachariah Sitchin, he could read it, you see, and he translated an awful lot. I mean, actually, that story of the Anunnaki genetically modifying a primitive man is actually possibly moved on a bit since then.
Mm.
That
There's
might,
loads of books about that, aren't there? That
Yeah.
have been channeled through various
Yeah.
different people.
I'm not sure whether that's. I mean, there's personally, I don't think the most incredible piece of technology ever made, the human body, was, genetically
Yeah.
modified from a primate on this planet.
Mm.
No.
I mean,
I personally don't think
also
so.
it's a very modern understanding and a very small time period in which we're going to be thinking that DNA is that which actually is the building block of the body.
Mm.
And I think we're coming to an understanding where we don't where it's part of the matrix of it, but it's not that which actually says what is going to
Yeah.
actually happen. So
Yeah.
it kind of seems to me as a kind of rendering of the past by a very culturally blinded sort of modern understanding, which might well change very soon.
Yeah.
Sitchin was a point in time, and
Yeah.
because he was one of the only ones that could read it, and he was translated and published very quickly, it's kind of like that's all there was.
Mm.
Right.
It was like, well, who else is there to compare him?
Mm.
But also, there's a
There was a
well,
handful of
he was
people.
being translated as well, wouldn't he?
Yeah.
And so it's his understanding of what that translation was initially,
Yeah.
as one layer of it, and
Yeah.
then it being translated again into English or
There you
whatever
go.
else. So everything gets it's interpretation.
Yeah.
isn't it? And his
yeah.
understanding of what he was reading, you know, was his understanding of what he was reading.
Yeah.
So it's like there's so much with that.
Yeah.
You know, it's like anything like that.
He gave us a good body of work to work with, I think, but some of the details clearly, you know, need other people working on.
But also they kind of link it, they link into all sorts of things, don't they, with all the ancient myths and creation stories of that we were made of clay. And, you know...
which could be symbolic
fashioned
language. And this is the thing, it's so easy to sort of build up your own...
And the indigenous American stories as well, there's loads of ones where they, you know, they tried making certain types of people from clay, but they didn't worship the creator in the right way. Then they tried to make them out of wood.
Yes.
And then it wasn't the right thing. And then they tried to make them from corn flour. And then there was some kind of receptivity because they could have gratitude and be able to sing, you know, just great spirit.
Yeah.
So it's fascinating. But it was interesting what you said about the brain being with all the terms and them lining up with what our brains are made of.
Yes.
Obviously, because we only use like that much of the memory. So
well, I'd read quite a lot into that telomerase thing, because that's sort of in the last 10 years they sort of worked out why we age. So it's intriguing to know that they're sort of fiddling around with that, and it just makes you wonder what haven't they released, you know, what have they found out, especially if they got David Hudson captured in some room or something like that, or have him on their payroll.
Or maybe he just did a runner.
Maybe he just did a runner. Maybe he didn't want the
Maybe
line
he's
right.
living in the woods, still looking like he's 30
or maybe he took a bunch of ormus and...
Well, yeah.
Well, perhaps it's kind of, you know, a sort of interdimensional being.
Yeah.
Maybe he wrote this book of Aquarius.
So, could you tell Anne what you said about Nibiru to me earlier? Because we had a little conversation about Nibiru, David.
Yeah. So that was related to the Jason Brashears thing.
Yeah.
So I can't remember where I read it, but it was theorising. So Nibiru, the Anunnaki home planet, is in our solar system, but has an ecliptic.
Yeah, we only see it once every
136 years or something like this.
Yeah, and then...
and Jason Brashears' theory is that I can't remember how many...
It's 130-ish years.
Yes.
Something happens.
The Phoenix event happens.
Yeah,
and
something changes.
then every four of these, there's a civilization ending cataclysm.
Yeah.
And so it kind of suggests that, I guess it would come past near twice, wouldn't it? But I don't know. And whatever I read was suggesting that on one of its sweeps past, the gravitational effect it had on Earth pulled all of the ice cap off Antarctica and caused the Great Flood.
Floods.
And there's probably been many great floods.
And also, but that was also linked exactly, but with the meteorites.
Yes.
Because when it moves, it jiggles everything up.
Well, it's probably dragging loads of space debris with it,
trying
isn't
to
it?
swith it, and then we get... So, exactly. Cataclysms, but in a phoenix
So it's
type
not...
thing.
It's not the planet that was meant to have been destroyed and then it left the asteroid belt.
No, that's Tiamat.
Right, okay.
Yeah. I think that's a different... Is Tiamat mentioned in Sumerian mythology? I think that's a different school of thought.
No.
I mean, it's meant to be linked with the war in heaven.
That's right.
Yeah.
And the asteroid belt is effectively the remains of Tiamat. I mean, that I can buy.
Steiner says the same.
He does. You're right. Yeah.
Does Steiner say anything about Monotomic Gold?
Not as far as I know.
No, I don't think so.
He was a Rosicrucian, wasn't he?
Yeah.
He was,
Yeah, I mean, he talks a lot about it.
Yeah.
So if that is the point of the Rosicrucians, he kept that quiet.
That symbol that you were talking about, though, with the cross and the circle and sometimes a rose, that's linked to so many different things in churches here, for example, but also it slightly different shapes, but all coming from the same
Yes.
thing,
Kind
isn't
of.
it?
Well,
For-
it's related to
all over.
mandalas and
Yeah,
cymatics
yeah.
and all sorts of.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh,
It's so you can just go off in any direction with it, can't you? It's crazy.
Well, bottom line is everything's connected, isn't it? And we just.
it's all really fascinating.
Mm.
Just going into a practical thing. Last night, Simon Reeve was in. I told you over supper that Simon Reeve was in South America,
Yeah.
and in almost every country he went to, people were digging for gold, and completely ruining the countryside, the jungle.
Yeah.
And there seems to be gold everywhere. And you were saying that it's in the seawater, so maybe there's, around the coasts would be a place to look for
Yeah.
monatomic.
Although I think the extraction process is, as I mentioned, extremely long-winded and laborious.
Yeah.
Because I think the gold within seawater is meant to be in the M state, so it's actually in there, and it just
That's what I
needs
mean,
it just needs extracting. It doesn't need to be processed particularly.
Did I read about like there's a lake somewhere in America with a town, and historically it was like a maybe it's Mexico, so it's somewhere north. But anyway, people would go and give offers of gold into the middle of the lake, and to appease or something like that. And then, but they think that there might be a gateway there, because every now and again really weird shit happens in this town around the lake.
Is
What
it
is
Lake
that?
Lake
Is that-
Titicaca in Bolivia? Well, it's
Is
on the
it?
border of Bolivia and Peru.
And where did I read that then? Is that great?
And what's the ancient site called there? Tiwanaku
Yeah.
on the coast there.
But they
And there's so many UFO sightings of UFOs
Yeah.
going into the lake.
yeah, and light in the middle of the night.
That's
and
right.
Odd, blah blah blah.
Yeah.
Because I was thinking about the gold and that being something that you can transform.
Yeah.
And yeah, so I was thinking maybe that had its roots in that, and maybe that's why
Yeah.
it's a. I don't know. Sorry, I just
They-
went off on one,
So
but yeah,
they,
like you said.
they found Findhorn was an example of where they found M state gold in the
Oh,
water.
Ah.
Really?
Yeah, and there's something there.
Yeah.
I don't know what it is exactly, but when I did my research, that was one of the places where they found it in the
And that
seawater.
would account for what happened there then.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and also there was, I don't know whether this was David Hudson or not, but there was experiments done with vegetables
That's
with
right.
seawater.
Yeah.
Is that right?
Yeah.
And they could just produce these enormous
Yeah.
vegetables,
Yeah.
massive, great vegetables the size of a room, which was also from the seawater.
Yeah.
The monatomic
I mean that
state.
that's the only evidence in that documentary that when he's visiting all these kooky, weird
Yeah.
alchemists, modern alchemists that live in trailer parks and stuff like that, is that they get out these jars of seeds and they're like, this one's regular and this
It
one's
was from
this
that.
one's from the M state. You know, I made some ormus and I watered my plants with it, and
There must be a laboratory way of making single chain atom gold.
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, it's just. I mean, surely you put some scientists in a room and you say, "Produce me single atom chain
yeah.
gold," and they would just do it.
But what
No?
what I find interesting is, I think I mentioned it, is that everyone's doing the seawater technique now,
Yeah.
and if the historical evidence, the biblical evidence, if you put any stock in that, which is reasonably convincing in terms of the whole migration and the Moses story, you know, you can come at it from a few angles, and they found the foundry in Qumran and Mount Horeb. It was definitely a smelting operation. That no one's attempted something on that scale, but perhaps they had tons of gold. You know, the elites and the pharaonic organisation had that quantity of gold whereby, you know, you just set some huge fire and that's the way to process it.
It's interesting, isn't it, how I've always thought, why is gold? In the Sitchin story, supposedly the Anunnaki came here because they had a war on their planet, and they wanted to monotomically charge their atmosphere.
Yes.
You know this. With gold, which seems really far-fetched, but that's the story, that they went to Mars and then they came here and they mined the gold and did that. But I've always thought, well, why is gold so magical? And it's right at the top of the chain almost, you know, in terms of its
It's
reverence.
Yeah.
incorruptible.
Yes.
Doesn't oxidise.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it obviously has amazing properties, but it's still, why is it so important in the history? That was the thing that got me, because it's so apart from everything else, isn't it?
Well, we know it's utilised in high electronics and
Yeah.
space flight
Yeah.
hugely. So, I mean, if someone did come from outside the planet, presumably they
want it.
want it.
It's
Yeah.
ruled by the sun as well, astrologically, isn't it? So it's light.
I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean,
Soul,
it is the
soul,
metal of the
soul.
sun, really.
Yeah.
I'd like to look more into Mesoamerica and South American cultures, which are very gold based,
Yeah.
you know, cities of gold and
Yeah.
all of that business, to see if there's any equivalent there. Did you ever find any mention of powder gold over there?
No. No.
No.
Only.
They've got the bags
in,
and the guys that came over for the sea that that
They've
didn't
got
walk.
bags there as well, haven't they?
Yeah,
Yeah.
handbags and the guys that came over the sea
With the beards
and with the beards and holding and telling them the stories
Yeah.
post.
I mean,
The
certainly
floods.
the myths all line up.
Yeah.
That it was Viracocha, who does look like one of the Mesopotamian
Yeah,
bearded
yeah,
people
yeah.
bearing gifts, and but you don't hear. But then again, they haven't translated texts
Well,
from
also
South America
things
because
got trashed. Yet
things got
again.
trashed. I mean, they have found a
Well,
lot of
Spanish.
codexes, but they're relatively late,
Mm.
and so they haven't really translated coherent texts.
But there's some translations of one of the missionaries, isn't there? Of
That's
like
right.
him saying, "Oh, you know, actually these people are, there's stuff going on, and I don't think we should be treating them like this."
Yeah.
You know.
That's right.
And
It
then he
was
got
a
booted
particular
out.
there was a particular missionary that was sympathetic to
Yeah.
the cause, wasn't there? But it was pretty bloodthirsty. over there.
I was just thinking as well about in Japanese cultures, there's a metal that's considered to hirapane, which is meant to be, it was used for temples, it's like a royal thing, a temple thing, and it was meant to be from elsewhere, and I think it made it into anime, but that's also in ancient Japanese.
That's quite intriguing.
Yeah, I've got it in some.
There's a lot of really good concepts in some anime stuff. I'm not a very huge fan of that kind of thing, but there was this series called I can't remember. It's in the early 90s, but it's effectively about giant robots that are there to fight these sort of angelic beings, but they depict the angels very much as the biblical giant wheels with eyes and all the weird stuff that's the literal descriptions of them, and it's all Gnostic. And whoever made this Japanese cartoon was obviously all into sort of Gnostic Christianity and based the whole thing. I can't remember what it's called now.
Has there been any references in China at all?
Yes, and I left that out, but it's a thing called Han purple, and it's a relatively recent discovery, and it's a pigment that they found to make purple, a bit like Egyptian blue. It's a man-made sort of manufactured substance, and they found that when they've burnt it or treated it with light, that it gives off photons. So it's connected to the Ormus phenomenon.
Interesting.
But it's quite recent.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because China's got huge amounts of pyramids, hasn't it?
It does indeed.
Yeah.
80 something or something
Yeah.
I found.
Every continent.
Every
You
house,
seem
yeah.
to try to bring clear in your talk that we have this modern day understanding of it being to do with the nucleus expanding the sphere of influence.
Yeah.
But in a way, that's just the modern scientific understanding.
Yeah.
And so we don't necessarily know what's really going on.
No, no.
It's, we've just got our sort of modern scientific concepts.
Yeah.
But I think a lot of the esoteric stuff is being proved now, isn't it? It's like Joe Dispenza talks about telomeres.
Yeah.
Yeah, and how you can actually make them longer doing certain meditations.
That's right.
It
and
is-
the Emoto stuff as well. And
That's right.
yeah.
Does he mention gold, Masuro Emoto?
No, he did his experiments on water
Yeah, yeah.
and rice,
Yeah.
but I don't think he mentions gold at all. But I don't see why the concept doesn't translate.
Because there's things like with the crystals, like with Aqua Aura or something. I'm thinking that's quartz, isn't it? That's had it's been blasted with gold, so it makes it look blue.
Puts a layer on the.
Yeah, it makes it, and then that's supposed to be really high frequency, sort of, because crystals seem to have a longevity like gold does,
Yes.
don't they? Because when they find these ancient things in tombs and stuff, they're in technology as well, aren't they?
Yeah, you couldn't have technology
Quartz
without.
is
Without
in-
quartz, yeah,
Is
quartz.
It's
Yeah.
interesting. I've got I don't know if you know about Marcus Vogel, so I'll just tell you this because it's really interesting. He was the head of IBM R&D for 27 years, so he's not some woo woo guy. And when he retired, he actually invented this way of cutting crystals that would amplify intentions. And as soon as he left IBM, he just went round in all these towns and villages in America, just giving these talks on crystals. But obviously, every single computer
It's
has got a
quartz
crystal
in
in
it.
it.
Yeah, and watches.
Yeah, and people
Yeah.
are like, they don't, it's like, oh, it's all woo woo. It's absolutely not
No,
woo
it's
woo.
not.
This
No.
guy was head of R&D for
Yeah.
27 years. It's a great story, actually.
What was
He
the
was
guy's
a lovely
name?
guy, Marcus Vogel.
Vogel.
Yeah, Marcus Vogel. And in fact, Dan Willis and Elena Denon did a whole show about those crystals.
Because the water thing, the guy, I can never remember his name.
Emoto.
Like I read about that
Yeah.
decades ago,
Yeah.
and I've always got quartz in my water filter. And it don't have you, it definitely, it makes it really nice, I think.
Yeah.
I can't afford one of these big, amazing things. I just got a jug. It's got a crystal in it. It's good stuff.
I looked into the homeopathic gold as well, so I had some. I really bought it. It was one of my weird things to put in my pan. And of course, the list of what it's good for is very similar. Obviously, and that's made
That's a
from
white
gold leaf.
powder.
It's made from gold leaf. They make it. What's a white powder?
Well, no, I was just thinking that the pills.
But that's because it's.
I know,
Potatoes.
but yeah.
And that thing about leadership is quite weird because that's what it's in the what the remedy's for. People struggling with leadership, or and maybe that's like a use. I don't know. Maybe that's.
Is that what it purports to be? That it's sold as
I
that?
had one on my phone. But
Mm.
it's one. It's like in the list of when you read about homeopathy, so
Yeah.
it's good for, and it's the depression. It's good for depression. It's good for certain illnesses. It's good for. But they talk about the picture of I think it was Napoleon Bonaparte, that classic have this anger struggling with kind of leadership things, and so for children that are it's a good one for children as well. But I forgot my phone stupidly. There's a big long list of things, but it touches on a lot of what you've spoken about.
Interesting.
So,
Yeah.
so gold's going to do what gold does, right, in whatever form.
Yeah.
It's going to.
And who knows? Maybe the homeopathic reduction method is achieving the same thing.
Well, I've got some if anyone wants to take some home and try it out. But,
I had
But do a 40-day fast first. It's
years
easy.
ago I had a lucid dream when I was at the beginning of my herbal training. I was going for my first clinical training in London. Had to catch the first bus from a station to get to the clinic. And the day before, this really sweet lady came round, just dropped in to visit me with a bunch of buttercups that she'd picked from her garden, and like a little girl with a bunch of buttercups, and she'd got really painful arthritic hip, and she was in agony, and I said, well, I'm going for my clinical training tomorrow. I asked her, what can I give you? And I had to get up really early to catch my first bus, and I woke up in the middle of this dream which was full of angels, and the angel said, The answer to this lady's needs was in the buttercups, not in the form of buttercups as a herbal tincture, but in the form of homeopathic gold
Wow.
and pollen grains. And she was, you know, she was that sort of personality, the gold personality, really
Wow.
very modest and self-facing, yeah. And it was such an amazing dream. I had to get up and go and catch my bus, and then sit in the back seat of the bus and get back into the dream and
Yeah.
finish it.
Amazing.
In the bus.
Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah.
It's interesting, isn't it, how manna's depicted as gold.
Mm.
That's what it's depicted as.
Yeah.
Well, that's in my head it is. I don't know if anybody else has that, but whenever I think of manna, I think of gold balls.
Oh really? No, I just think of bread. Loaves,
Yeah,
that's how I-
Really?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think of it as gold balls. Strange. And
But
them
it's
being
so-
bigger
I just
and
think
smaller.
it's light.
There was something about it being found as white on the ground or something, wasn't
Yeah.
there?
Yeah, I remember that story. I was really excited when I heard that story. I didn't know about the one, but Shabbat is it, and that they found all the gold powder on the floor.
Yeah.
It
So
like it'd
they-
been abandoned.
Yeah, yeah. So-
yeah, with Flinders Petrie.
Yeah.
I requested to go there, and I was told by that same guy that
It would cost you.
well, exactly, that technically I couldn't go there.
Oh really?
Yeah, but
like
then
that.
I've subsequently seen on YouTube Egyptologist stuff that I follow
Actually
that
there.
a group of Christian groups are allowed to go there,
Really?
sort of following the Exodus route. So I think
Wow.
that's the way to do it. But I'd
Yeah.
love to go there.
Well, you're
Yeah.
going to, aren't you?
Well, yeah, I'm definitely going to. Yeah,
That's really
Um, but it's funny that they just tidied it up. I don't know what this stuff
Swept
is.
it on, put
That's-
it in a bin.
Yeah,
Uh,
because apparently there's not a trace of it there,
really?
and then it was
Yeah.
several feet high. You
That's
can
what I
you can
heard.
read Flinders Petrie. He was absolutely meticulous in
His description.
description
Yeah, I
and
remember that.
writing down, documenting it,
Mm.
and not a trace of it.
Because I remember just trying to chase what the formula was
Yeah,
and how to make it. That was my chase. And I told you my two friends went to America. They actually went over there. Bevis is still around somewhere to try and find
Yeah,
David
yeah.
Hudson.
yeah.
They went over to try and find him. There was three of us. We kind of comedically called ourselves the three investigators. And I wasn't going to go over there, but they did. They went over there. And they went to, was it Arizona where it was?
Yeah.
Yeah.
They went to Arizona. And they found nothing. But they had a great time.
Of course.
Yeah, yeah. That's exactly what they were like Indiana Jones.
Yeah.
They did
I
it.
was
Because I remember but you brought up Barry Carter. He was in our
Oh, was
on
he
our
really?
sphere, yeah.
He's quite likeable,
Yeah,
in
he
that
was-
documentary. Yeah.
Bevis and Marek actually met him a few times.
Mm.
I didn't, but
He
they did.
interacts, or no, he did up until a few years back with the forums.
Really?
There's a really good forum called Alexandra with an H at the beginning,
Right.
and that has tons of really good information about Ormus, and it's got a forum. And Barry Carter was quite,
Yeah.
quite active.
Because
on
when
it.
I think when I was doing my research, it was like
No.
it might have been 2003.
Mm.
So and there was nothing.
Yeah.
There was tiny amounts, and I kept going and finding the same thing
Mm.
over and over and over again. And that's when we decided that they were going to go to America to try and push the story on.
Yeah.
And they went to Findhorn as well. But the trail was bare,
Yeah.
and I just dropped it all because I was like, oh, I can't be chasing this anymore. So it wasn't. Well, we met Lawrence Gardner. We went to see Lawrence
I
Gardner.
mean, that's amazing. That's I'd
We
love
went
to
to see
know.
Lawrence Gardner.
Oh, have met
In
him.
fact, I think we
Yeah.
talked about that, didn't we?
We
We were there.
at the release of The Secrets of the Lost Ark or something.
That's it. We were at the same talk.
Yeah.
I've only known Mark a few weeks,
Yeah.
and we were talking, and he
This
was at
was
the
20
same
years-
talk as
19
I
years
was,
ago.
Mm.
like 20 years
We were
ago.
in the same place.
Yeah, which is
I asked
amazing.
the question and then he remembered me.
Yeah, because I remember it was amazing when Mark told me. I was like, I remember you saying that, which is bizarre because I didn't hear him, but he just put his hand up and he said, "Have you taken any?"
Yeah. And he said he hadn't.
And he said he hadn't, and I remember
So
that.
it's
I
all-
was like, yeah, I remember
Someone
somebody
started
saying that.
researching it, and he said it got posted to him, but he never,
He never said.
Yeah.
never wanted to
okay.
take any.
No.
Wow.
That really stopped me actually. That really stopped me on the track.
Yeah, why not?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Give yourself a mistake. Yeah, that was
Do you-
interesting.
Do you think there's any connection with Monatomic Gold and fourth state of water stuff and the EZ water? And
I don't know
all
much. I don't know much about EZ.
that? Right.
No.
Yeah, I think this man Thomas Cowan might have brought them up in the same article. I mean, I don't know why I'm connecting them in my mind. But
No, but you never know.
I mean, it's another thing which is in the air quite a lot.
Yeah. Another dead end I went down is natron. You know, the sort of salt used for the mummification process in Egypt. And I just thought that's got to be the same stuff. It's a white powder that we didn't of mineral, varying mineral makeup.
Yeah.
But I kind of think that might have been, and this is just a personal theory, once the technology of mufguts had gone out of Egypt, the secret had been lost or taken elsewhere, that the subsequent dynasties employed natron as a kind of inert version because they didn't have the
real thing.
anymore.
So I've got an interesting one for you because you're going to carry on with your research in this, aren't you?
Of course.
Do you know that the Sanhedrin is still around and it's in London?
No.
So that's all I'm going to say.
Okay.
That's all I'm going to say. But there is a strong possibility that actual governing body is in London.
Amazing.
Yeah.
The Sanhedrin.
Yeah.
I know that word.
So the Sanhedrin they were like priest-classed parliament governing of the Jewish people.
Well,
right.
This is what the Melchizedek thing, and this is the thing. This is the thing that no one else has really gone into. That's my one angle into it. Is the Melchizedek priesthood, where I found so many threads of this continuing line.
Well, I remember following the Melchizedek line, and he's only mentioned once in the Bible, and I can't remember this. It's such a long time ago, but you summed it up really nicely actually in your talk what he did. But he just did one thing, and he was only known for doing one thing.
Yeah.
But he was clearly in the line of David. And then I stumbled across Drunvalo Melchizedek on the back of that.
Yeah.
And there are a couple of people who've come out and said they're in that line.
Yeah.
But clearly he knew about the shewbread.
Yeah. So that was he
definitely knew.
That was some sort of split. At which level? Because I think
it is a dead end.
Yeah.
It was. I couldn't find any other information, and I couldn't find any equivalent characters.
Yeah. To
kind of jump and go.
I want to look into good translations of the old Jewish scripts where I think he's mentioned more.
Yeah.
As far as I can tell, but there's a lot more digging to be done there.
Yeah.
But it's quite interesting.
I think Solomon is you can the Keys of Solomon is readily available.
Yeah, I've got that on PDF.
Yeah. And that does offer some ideas of the rituals or the ceremonies surrounding it.
And soul. So.
Yeah. I mean, it's kind of difficult, isn't it? There's always that sort of physical and allegorical take on things. Is it metaphorical? Is it symbolism? Or is it reality?
A combination.
Yeah, it has to be, doesn't it? It's got to be multi-layered.
Well,
the whole thing. Having seen Simon Reeve in South America with all these people getting their gold and the greed and the desperate need to get rich.
Yeah.
But actually, this aspect that we're talking about now is if it's got to be dealt with integrity.
There we go.
Hasn't it?
And I think that's the really interesting point that alchemists have
quite a
talked about.
small amount of gold that you need at the end of the day.
And I mean, okay, I know somebody who's taken it a few times, and it's just gone on an ego trip. And
that's intense.
But mate,
he's brought his own consciousness to it.
But that's what I was going to say. It's what's in your heart, isn't it? Really, at the end of the day. So it's like if you're going to show, that's going to be kind of magnified and.
Yeah.
Well, it's like with the alchemy thing. It's like what you're doing in the lab is a mirror of what's happening.
Absolutely.
All those processes are internal processes if you're doing it right, aren't they? They're not.
And The same could be said with plant medicine,
Yeah.
because you have those brujos out in the ayahuasca ceremonies out in South America, and you hear horror stories about what they're getting up to and abusing their clients, and they're taking the same drug. It's not like some sort of, you know, light and thing. They're just on a dark path with the same medicine. So you can use these things for light or dark. I truly believe that.
So bring in the light.
Absolutely.
I was out there last year doing that, and the people I was doing it with were lovely. So.
But they were all right with
Oh,
that.
they were lovely.
Yeah.
Really special people.
Yeah, I've had the same experience.
Yeah.
But you hear stories.
Yeah, I know you
know.
do. Yeah.
Yeah, I
Just
mean,
bring the
I've
light.
heard
Yeah.
one of late actually, yeah.
There's a new documentary which sometimes they're a bit mawkish and annoying, ayahuasca documentaries, and it was called no. Anyway,
Wasn't the last shaman?
yeah, The Last
Yeah, I
Shaman.
watched
Did
that.
you watch that?
Yeah.
And that's a bit of an eye opener where right at the
Yeah.
beginning the person dies in the ceremony and they're like,
Yeah.
right, let's find somewhere else.
Yeah.
It's amazingly frank,
Yeah,
isn't
It's
it?
super frank.
Right at the beginning and you're like,
Yeah.
fucking hell, if that was me, excuse my
Yeah.
French, and
Yeah.
I was heading out to cure my depression,
Yeah.
I'd probably pack my bags and go back home at that
Yeah.
point.
Oh God, yeah.
Bless
But
him.
it's a happy
He
ending.
was brave.
Yeah, it's a nice story.
Yeah.
It's, you know,
Yeah.
I just feel bad for the shaman guy at the end, but I feel that was kind of a bit set up.
I feel like that all of the shamans that were on that, they're all there's a lining up to a certain extent, but I didn't feel like there was anyone there that was. Yeah, the guy at the end. Oh, I've just remembered the end. Oh
Yeah,
no!
where he's working in the garage or
Yeah.
something.
But he was really humble.
Yes,
He wasn't going around bragging about who
and
he
that's
was
exactly
or
what
da-da-da.
Anne's talking
And
about,
that's,
isn't it?
That's the thing.
That's where
So
the
the
healing's
ones
going to
that
come from.
Are like that probably
Mhm.
wouldn't want to be filmed anyway, would they?
Yeah.
It would just be.
There's no way you'd
You
allow
know.
that to be filmed, surely.
Yeah.
You know, it's crazy.
But you've got nothing to
Really?
prove, have you? Because you're just doing your. You're just doing
Mm.
your healing.
And every
Oh,
time you
you
hear
should-
about one of
should-
those, you know, documentaries or real life stories where someone really had something bad, be it really chronic suicidal depression or some sort of, you know, neurological disease or Crohn, you know,
Yeah.
whatever, something really unhealable by Western medicine, they always go to someone that doesn't accept payment.
Mm.
Every time.
Yeah.
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 Is this a good moment to offer everybody a happiness cookie?
I think it's the
Yeah,
perfect
it is.
There's
time.
always a moment for
What's
that.
in the cookie?
Well,
Yeah,
they